Hello, what do you do when you decide you need to make some fairly big changes in your garden? I'm Zorab and this is Byther Farm. So we've lived here for about 20 months and in that time I've developed the vegetable garden and an orchard, a half-acre food forest and the beginnings of a cut flower field. Each year during winter, Mr. J and I go through an assessment process. We look back at what's been really successful during the year and things that have been challenging and things that just actually haven't worked. And I find this a really healthy, almost cathartic process because it allows me to assess and to evaluate and then to make any changes that we want to make so that we can reevaluate next year, so that we are constantly learning. And a couple of weeks ago, as we did our walk around the garden and decisions were made and things were suggested, and in the end I just said I've come to two conclusions this year, but I just want to talk them through with you before I actually put them into action. The first of those is that I'm not sure that this is the right year for developing the flower garden in that field behind me there. I think that I need to lift the plants that are in there. There's not even hundreds of them in there. There are some plants in there and I think I need to lift them and bring them here to the food forest so that I can develop this food forest so it feels really full and not only productive but also really decorative as well. And I think that would make my soul sing more. I'm not quite feeling it in the food forest yet, so I think by bringing some ornamentals in here that would really help. Now that's not going to be a super quick process, that's going to have to happen over a number of weeks. However, it won't be that long before things are coming into bud and starting to grow again. So I need to get them lifted from there and up into here before they're really actively growing. So that's my first job for the next few weeks. And although I spend a lot of time saying let's not talk about things as jobs, that actually does feel like it's a job. Once it's done, it will feel like an absolute pleasure. It will feel like it is truly the right thing to have done. The decorative plants I have in the food forest, I absolutely love. I love having them here. And look at this causer line. I brought this with us from our last home. We were actually given these by somebody who they had outgrown their front garden. But they've got as much space as they like to grow here. In our last home, I developed one area at a time. So it took me 2 years to develop the vegetable garden. I used raised beds in this area because, well, the ground was just so poor when we moved here. I needed to raise the level and create soil to be able to grow in. I've got 20 raised beds here of various different depths. These first four have perennials in them, so asparagus, perennial kale, strawberries and raspberries. Further down there I've got some Babington leeks, which are a perennial leek, and also perennial onions. And then I developed the central flower garden. In the central section of the garden I have created what is predominantly a flower garden, and I really wanted to have something that was very ornamental because the rest of the site is quite utilitarian. But I also grow some edibles in here, but they're not for us. I grow quite a lot of brassicas out in the open, so not covered, not treated with anything, and I grow them just so that the caterpillar population can feed on those and can reproduce, make lots more butterflies. And even though they're mostly cabbage butterflies, I'm really happy to support the butterfly population. Butterflies are food for bats and birds and our local hedgehog population, and I want to be able to support those as much as possible. And if that means having lots of cabbage white butterflies, well, I'm okay with that. And then I set about quite carefully planning what plants would go where and then sourcing them. Now, reality is there are plants that I didn't ever get hold of, and there are plants that I acquired that weren't in the plan. And then moved on to the market garden. And once again, I'm growing this as a polyculture. So on this side, I've got sweet corn, squashes and carrots. Over here, I've got beans and chard. And at the far end, there are mixed brassicas and courgettes, which I think are called zucchinis elsewhere. And even though this is a relatively large space, I still want it to work as hard as possible for me. So this year is the first time I've grown in this space, and I planted overwintering onions. So the onions went in, and not long before they started reaching maturity, I planted in the sweet corn. So as I took the onions out, the sweet corn and the squashes were already in place and just ready to romp away. And through all of that time, I was also developing the food forest, because the vegetable garden, the market garden and the flower garden weren't just separate from, but were actually an integral part of that food forest. And what I realise I've done here in my eagerness to kind of replicate the beautiful gardens that we had in our last home is I've just pushed forward a little bit too quickly in trying to develop the different areas. So I'm super happy with the veg garden. Although we're on a north facing slope, I think I've done as much as I can to make that be a really nice area for growing vegetables in. And I'm happy with the orchard, and the food forest is starting to come together. The other fields that we have livestock in them, so you can see the sheep in the background there. Hello, girls. And bit by bit this will come together, but there is no rush. I don't need to race to get it all done. When we first had bees on our homestead, the idea was that the beekeeper would come and would teach me, and that hopefully my confidence would grow. And indeed, that is what happened. So I've had two different beekeepers as teachers. One retired when the pandemic started in 2020.
That's a stunning frame of honey. I was just saying to Eric there, that's one of the nicest frames of honey I've seen. Yes.
And since then I've had Andy the bees teaching me, and Andy has been absolutely brilliant in building my confidence and showing me how to do things, to the point where I was quite happy to do with some support, to do a complete inspection of a hive. So take it all apart, look at the bees, check them over for any issues and for health, and just so to go through the hive. So I had got to that point. And in April last year, I had an encounter with some bees. And it's one of the stories that I tell in my new book, The Seasoned Gardener. The aim of the book is to share a month-by-month celebration of the abundance in our gardens, of the wildlife that surrounds us, and with just how much pleasure we can get from being outside and in nature. And it's now available to pre-order. It will be published in the spring in the UK and late spring in USA. And you can find it on Amazon, on other online stores. But if you want a signed copy, and if you want to support me the most, you can order it from my website at bytherfarm.com/book. books. But the incidents with those bees might have just been a little bit more nature than even I could cope with. And so it has made me reassess how I feel about having the bees on the site, and whether I really want to carry on trying to learn to look after them. And my conclusion is that actually I'm still incredibly scared of having bees here. And what is the point of having 4 or 5 hives on your land of animals that actually you've spent a long time trying to get used to, and it's just not happening? And in fact, last year I took a step backwards, and so now I've got to the point where I don't even want to go up into the field where the bees are, and I need to go up there each day to feed the sheep. Over the course of the next year, I am going to stop having bees on Byther Farm. Now, that doesn't mean bees are banished by any means, but I'm no longer going to have an apiary. So over the next few months I will get the beehives moved to a new site where they will no doubt live very happily. So how do I make this feel better in my head? How do I make this not feel like a failure? Well, it's absolutely not a failure, because part of the process that we do on the farm is a continual assessment, a constant adjustment, and an acceptance that it's perfectly okay to change and adapt and make things work for us the way we need them to. So I am pretty excited about planning the plants that I'm going to bring into the food forest and where I'm going to put them. I'm doing lots of looking back at old videos of seeing the planting combinations I put together in our last site and deciding whether those will work here on a bigger scale. I think they will. And I've also decided that this area behind me here, I'm going to create a shrubbery and herbaceous border. The shrubbery here is one of the first areas that I planted when we moved in 4.5 years ago. And I put in quite, well, they weren't small plants, but in comparison to how they are now, they were small. And I put in things that would have some flowering interest right through the year. And I also put in things that mean something to me. So it will be a mixed planting of shrubs and of flowers that will die down each year and then come back up, but that there will be year-round interest, and it will be a really lovely ornamental space within the food forest. When I first started thinking about that, I was thinking, oh, you know, that's an awful lot of work. I need to create a load of beds or plant into the soil or prepare the ground or something. And then I realised that in the flower garden I had already put 10 frames for raised beds. And this week I have already started moving those. So the first one is here, propped on the fence, because although I could lift it out of the ground there, I got it as far as here and then realised I can't carry it on my own, so I need to wait for Mr. J to come and give me a hand moving that. But I can use all of those raised beds in that area where I want to grow ornamentals. I will have ready-made beds. I can just plant into them, use some weed suppressing membrane, or use some cardboard around them to suppress the weeds. And, well, you know, job's a good one. So what I'm trying to say is that if you look around your garden and decide that there are things that you don't like, that aren't working for you and the way you live, it's not the end of the world. You have the opportunity to redevelop, move them, redesign them, or renegotiate the way you use that space. And that's all for the good. There's absolutely no point in having an area in your garden that you don't like, is unproductive, or just doesn't make your soul sing. So if you can't imagine or don't remember what the gardens and food forest looked like in our old house, I've made plenty of videos of garden tours, and I'll leave a link on the screen, and if you click on that, it'll take you straight through to a video.